because when they tried to talk to Long John Silver about it, Long John Silver's like,
by the way.
yeah, Long John Silver's like, what are you doing? Like, don't take my buddy away from me. So one of the players, Kara, just took the initiative to trick Long John Silver into sending Gulliver back. It's like she actively lied to him in order to get Gulliver back.
This really upset Connor.
Yes.
You can tell by his emotional reaction.
I think it was a legitimate play.
It was a legitimate
I'm saying
play.
that to Cara, who was watching this a few hours from now, I'm sure.
You're a horrible person. But anyway, so we had Long John naturally get very upset about this, and we actually had, Kara was one of the players that was very strongly anti-Cabal, and as a result of being deceived by Kara, Long John Silver went against everything they, it was like, I can't trust you about anything anymore. Clearly everything you've been telling me is false. I'm gonna go talk to these Cabal guys, and the Cabal ended up gaining a 5th member that wasn't a member of the Cabal before. And that was a small example of, I think, that ended up being a really powerful response to what the players were doing.
It had a happy ending ultimately, but when you give players meaningful choices, you have to be prepared to follow up on if they don't do the right thing. I mean, in this case, it's not clear what the right thing was, because I'm not sure how else they could have done it. I mean, they were clever. We expected them to come up with something, and they did. But if they fail to write enough fics, then Adele dies. If they fail to find a way to send Gulliver back without tricking Long John Silver, then he joins the Cabal. And then they have to live with that, and they have to move on, and they did.
And they also let that influence their later play styles. They debated very heatedly about whether lying to characters was okay. And they ultimately decided that it wasn't, and they didn't do it ever again. So I think that for me, the one big takeaway here is that this might not be the case with bigger ARGs, with ARGs that have, thousands of super active players. But for an indie ARG, for a small ARG, it's really good to know who your community is, to know how they interact with each other, to observe their play style, and to figure out how to complement it, to bring it into your game in a way that maybe it wasn't originally planned to be there. I think we're, yeah, okay. You guys would just want to, we can take questions, we can tell stories. It's up to you guys.
Sure, questions?
We can do Q&A now.
Maybe I'll tell another story later.
You can tell a story during the
Okay.
The stories might come from the questions. Now, I'm really impressed that you guys were able to tailor. I'm really impressed you guys were able to tailor your game to the choices that your players were making. But granted, those were consensus choices made by a vocal population. And given that alternate reality games have a large number of lurkers, how do you guys make that choice as to what player involvement affects your game and what you just shut out completely?
So the thing that's interesting to that question is the players who are the most active are the ones that are interacting with the characters the most. So it kind of made sense that they would have the most influence. And what would happen if someone didn't like the way things were going is they would join and become more active to try to sway things the other way.
That happened many times. For example, the girl we keep mentioning, Kara, she joined, like a month in, 2 months in, because she was really frustrated that she wasn't able to talk over all of her ideas with other people. So generally the lurkers who wanted to be able to influence more stopped lurking.
As a follow-up to that then, how did you prevent game jacking from occurring from those that were unsatisfied by your decisions?
Rick is frantically gesturing at us to not talk about this too much, as it's his talk tomorrow, part of it at least.
I'm sorry, Rick. I will withdraw the question and ask again tomorrow.
It'll get interesting.
Okay, good. Well, we'll leave it there. Anyone other have questions here?
Yeah, I was wondering, the fictional elements where the players themselves were telling stories was a huge part of this game. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you worked with them and encouraged them to start both telling stories and honing that side of the art?
Sure. So that began basically with the meta guards, luckily. So we didn't have to figure out how to do it later. But we asked, or they asked us how they could participate more, and we said, this is how. Give us stories, write stories for us, and we will make them real. We will make them canonically part of this story, and it's you'll have a big statue forever in your name.
Yeah.
And actually, I was going to say, do you want to talk about the Sherlock Moriarty conundrum?
Do we want?
You know what? That's a really good
Yeah,
way.
it's so,
It fits with the question.
are we
and it's a
talking
good
about the
story.
Moriarty story?
Yes.
Tom should talk about that one. Tom.
This was my decision. These were my bad decisions then.
That was good decision.
Well, they ended up being good. They were bad for a few hours. Okay, so everyone else went to bed. We managed this in a giant Skype chat, and everything looked okay for tomorrow. Tomorrow was a big day. We were going to send back Holmes and Moriarty, and everybody all in one big clump, because Holmes and Moriarty, they had these schemes that like interlocked, and they were outwitting each other, and then
Because
like
they're
the
Holmes and
player,
Moriarty.
one of the players had come up with a scheme that was supposed to outwit both of them, but it was all going to go wrong, and we had
Our
it all
players had
planned
a lot
out.
of schemes.
And then everyone but me went to bed, and then I realized that there were problems with all of the schemes. I had to fix it overnight. And anyway, we ended up picking these the winning stories. I ended up picking the winning stories that night, and I think the story she wants me to tell is that Moriarty's story was one where Moriarty outwits Watson, outwits Watson and gets Watson to kill Holmes. I know that sounds very strange, but I swear this was one of the best stories that we got at all. It's really, really compelling. And I totally bought it, and Moriarty fooled me too. So we picked this story where Watson kills Holmes, and that is getting elevated to canon, right? That is becoming the real story that gets accepted, and that's the reality once they get sent back, as Holmes dies right away. The player response to that wasn't positive, despite the fact that we said, well, because they loved Holmes and they hated Moriarty. And we said, bear in mind that this is only true in relative to Moriarty. Within Holmes's reality, he's alive, and there was all this metaphysical mumbo jumbo, but that wasn't good enough for them. So we had to add this. There was a quirk of the timing that they didn't learn everything all at once, so we had a chance to step back and regroup. And we changed it to Moriarty, like the story where Holmes dies was only elevated to canon within Moriarty's own mind as he's tumbling off the waterfall, like incident in Owl Creek Bridge, and he just constantly relives this lie where he has won in the moment before death, and that they accepted.
Was that what you wanted me to tell?
That, and also there were characters making deals with other characters, players making deals with other characters.
Players making deals with players.
Players making deals with players in secret chat rooms that they set up specifically so that we would not see them and foil their plans. So what happened is that one character sent another character. Moriarty sent Long John.
Long John sent
Moriarty
sent Holmes. Poirot sent Long John. Poirot followed Moriarty.
Okay.
Wasn't it that?
Something.
Morgan
Tom- no,
ended
Tom
up
won. Oh my God,
sending
it was
back.
What
Moriarty.
happened was Mr. Administrator, the guy who wants to send them all back, had struck a deal. Was it Mr. Administrator who struck his deal?
Yeah,
Okay,
he struck the
yes,
deal.
he struck a deal
Deals were
with
struck.
Morgan Le Fay, where Morgan Le Fay was now very angry at Moriarty, and she conspired with him to send Moriarty back if and only if Moriarty could get this story. If he could erroneously live out his victory as he died for the rest of his very short life. So, I guess what I'm saying is, to answer your question, the players just we schemed along with the players. We didn't have to really say, please write things. We just had to, we just let them go.
It probably goes without saying in a group like this that players want to get involved.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a design perspective, the reason why they wrote was that the result of writing was some of the most dramatic changes in the world, the story that you could have. So there was a lot of incentive to write. You could do a lot of other things, but if you wrote, you would have a very dramatic, immediate impact on the story. And I think just as far as feedback goes and general design principles, like that's how we got them to do it.
I want to add briefly about these stories that they got better and better over the course of the game.
They're all available on
And
our website.
they are all available on watchthefootage.com, probably somewhere in the forums. Anyway, they're not easy to
We'll
find.
compile them for you.
Anyway, but they got better and better, and we got dozens of stories from well, not dozens, we got many stories from the same people, and we could watch individual writers get better. And in part, the game was designed to teach writing skills. We were working for a website that's all about the craft of writing, so why not teach that? And in the last story, like we had guidelines for the early stories that were basically don't write a self-insert fic, write something new and
Needs
fresh.
to take place in their world.
Yeah, and at the end, fighting Cthulhu, we said, I don't see any possible way you could write a compelling story where 4 characters you just made up fight Cthulhu and none of them die. So some of them have to die, and we didn't accept any stories where there were no casualties. So we gradually built these people up, the players up, until they could write compelling death scenes. It was hard to read that pile.
I just have a quick question. It seems to me that a major theme of this panel is the kind of sticky issue of players' rights and player privilege. And you guys have said some really kind of strong support for player privilege in reference to this project. And it seems that all of you guys pretty much believe this, like, unconditionally. But I just wanted to ask you, do you believe that like player privilege and player rights are like paramount in all interactive fiction, or is it conditional on the project?
So I'm gonna talk about Sanditon for a sec. So, here's the difference between something like The Wall Will Fall and something like Sanditon. In Sanditon, we were telling the story, our story, in Sanditon, alongside the players telling their stories in Sanditon. And we were getting, we have gotten critiqued for our story, which we feel no need to change, because ours is not the only story in Sanditon. We have told, I mean, people know that, I'm pretty sure people know that we film these months in advance. We do not have the time or the money, or it's just not a project designed to have quite the same level of interaction with the players as far as like the creators are concerned on a day-by-day basis. The Wall Will Fall, we were constantly creating the game with the players, not just alongside them, but saying, all right, you've done this, now I do this, now you do this, okay, great, now is my turn. So it was much more, it was much less telling stories side by side and much more telling one story together. Much more like sitting down at a table and us being, you know, the dungeon masters and then being the players.
And to follow up on the players' rights thing, it's not like the players were able to do whatever they wanted and just run roughshod over, you know, like whatever was built. It was more of an issue of being true to the world and all the actors in it. And the players were some of those actors, and the characters were some of those actors. And if the players really wanted to do something and it made sense, then yeah, they should be able to do it. But if the players want to do something, I mean, I think Bakara's story is a great example. Like, that was a solution, but we made sure that solution had consequences. And in the end, that made it more compelling. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, like, exactly how player rights is defined.
Yeah, are we answering your question correctly?
Yeah, like I'm thinking some examples of like the player rights debate. One of the most recent and biggest would be the issue with the Mass Effect endings, where the entire fan base was like, "That's a shitty ending. Do it again."
Well,
And they-
see, I haven't actually finished Mass Effect, so I can't comment on whether or not it's a shitty ending. Okay,
It's
but
a shitty
like,
ending.
I mean, if
The Supreme Court upheld that.
the Supreme Court upheld that ending. I like that, Tom.
I didn't come up with that.
Good. Oh, okay. No, that is interesting. I mean, if the problem with the Mass Effect ending was that it was bad, as opposed to being an ending that was not that was different from what the players wanted,
Right.
I would be firmly in the camp of that. Hey, if it works in the course of that world, it should have stayed the way it was. But everything I've heard about the ending is like basically that Shepard is space Jesus or something like that. I don't.
Spoiler alert.
It's
actually-
even worse.
Yeah, it's even worse than that apparently. So, I mean, in that case, it sounds like the world of this the developers might have violated the world of the story a little bit, and that was the problem there. Not that they upset the players; it's that it did not feel connected to the world. Again, I haven't played it, so if anyone from BioWare ever, for some reason, watches this, don't
We love you, Harris.
Yeah, you're great.
I've got a quick question
Okay.
about actually going on to each one of you. Assuming that the reason this was successful is because you were able to get your community to engage with it, what would you each say was the one thing that made it that success?
Let's start on the other side, Tom. Moderator
No
privilege.
pressure. From the beginning, we had designed a game based on choice. Dana, Connor, and I met in an interactive fiction class that was all about choice-based games, and we did a lot of experimenting, and we made a lot of mistakes, and it was an adventure, and we wanted to repeat those mistakes on a much larger scale. It was always a story that was designed to respond to player choices. The choices ended up surprising us tremendously, and we ended up building choices that weren't there in the first place, but we were already thinking along the right terms. Basically, if your climax has multiple ways that it could go, then I think you should do this. To address the player rights question, if you are building a world that is supposed to respond to player choice, you must respond to player choice. If you are not, that's fine, and you don't have to. But yeah.
I think what made the games extremely successful, beyond even just player choice, was listening to the community specifically. You can see what the choices they'll make, whether they'll take path A, path B, path C. That makes it partially successful, but what made this uniquely successful, I think, is the fact that we specifically listened in the forums. We specifically got into their chat system. We listened to them in a very, I guess, intimate way to ensure that what we brought to them really did apply to them, as opposed to just saying, okay, they chose path B, now let's give them the next choice.
The central moral quandary at the middle, while it was very hard, it definitely raised the investment for a lot of people. And I have to agree with a lot of what Tom had said about it just being the choices and the fact that we did actually respond. It was actually very frustrating early on when some of the people there, so our players were very big on meta, and there was a very large component that was like, meta, nothing we decide matters because it's all got to be railroaded anyway because that's how ARGs work. And it took us a little while to break free of that or make it clear to the players that
We
that
had
was.
fictional characters go into the thread and say that's not true, and they would argue with them. Eventually, we realized we had to show them and not tell them.
Yeah. But I would say, so just to throw out one that's different, I think, so there's four of us sitting up here, it can sound like it's largely us. We had a team of just fantastic, we had a bunch of fictional characters, and we had different writers for every single one. Well, not every single one, some wrote two. And this allowed us to give each character a meaningful arc. And each character, this also continued the thread because that allowed the characters to each respond to what was going on in a reasonable fashion. And I think if it was the fact that even if you don't care about the bigger thing, you could care about Sherlock. Even if you don't care about Sherlock, you can care about the Wicked Witch and her failed political campaign. And I think that was something that we really had going for us, is different people cared about different characters. and they naturally found different points to invest in.
One more question.
Just checking if it's on. First, I want to applaud you guys for allowing for a failure. And in some of the storytelling traditions that I'm a part of, there's this concept of playing to lose, where it's entirely appropriate for a tragic ending to happen or for consequences to happen in the game based on your actions, and to see that fallout happen. I've played in ARGs for a long time, and it's to me refreshing to see a group of people kind of embrace the idea that, well, Adele may die. This is entirely possible. Two questions I want to ask you. One is, knowing that there was that failed condition at the end where Adele could have died, how would you have felt if you had to have killed him? And the second question I have goes back to an earlier point that you guys were talking about in regarding to hacking the voicemail, and that was the players were resistant because in real life they didn't feel this was appropriate. I'm curious on why you chose not to respect that choice on their part, and try to figure out a workaround to address that issue rather than encouraging them to go kind of with the typical traditional ARG trope.
So I'd like to just address the second part. It was because they were already at the point in the puzzle where that's what had to happen. We were not, I will just say this. I was not creative enough to think of another way that they could get those voicemails, specifically those voicemails it was supposed to reveal a character, who a character was, and they were masterfully acted, and I did not want to let that chance go away for our players to have that experience of going, that's who that character is. And I was selfish, and I was not creative enough to come up with another way to make that happen.
In an ideal world, we would have, and by the end, when we were improvising our ending with Cthulhu, I think we had the skill sets that we could have worked around that. The other question you asked was about what if Adele had died, and actually there's a question that comes before that, which is what if Adele was about to die? Because there was a deadline for these stories. Remember, it was like 4 or 5 days or something we gave them. If 2 days had passed and we only had a third of the stories in that we needed, we would have started sounding alarm bells. The players would have known if Adele was about to die. They would have had to choose repeatedly that they did not care. And if they did not care about their forum moderator at the end of a 4-month game, the extent to which we had failed them, the failure would be ours and not theirs. It was never really in question at the end.
So I have to give this answer because it's a long-running thing. I would have been overjoyed to kill Adele. So the story behind that is that Adele was one of the players, was actually pretty much the only player that got like a peek behind the curtain at certain points, and I used this to mess with him thoroughly. And one of those was, hey Adele, we're going to kill you. And then when it came to the end, we're like, now we're actually going to kill you. This is amazing. But yeah.
Never followed through on that threat.
Yeah, we never did. Not yet.
So realistically, what would have happened
That's him, by the way.
is, oh yeah, that is
That's
Adele.
Adele.
That's Adele right there.
That's
He
not
almost
Adele.
killed him.
That's Mr. Bullshit.
So what would have happened is we would have basically said, okay, so you know we like you, but you can't come back to the forum even for the post-mortem as Adele, because you're dead. You are not alive. You are dead. So you're not a ghost. You're just gone. And your friends will have to live with the choice that they made. Sorry.
Would you have given him a funeral at least?
Yeah, of course. We would have made it very sad. We would have made sure that everybody cries.
We had a
You will
memorial
suffer.
page for every character. Like we had our players curated a memorial page for every character in the game that died.
There were a few.
And there were a few, and I'm guessing they would not have done anything less than sent him off with a Viking funeral. And we would have been the ones to set fire to that ship.
All right, thank you so much for walking through a lot of wall to wall. And we're going to take one more 5 minutes.